for today.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, he only became successful when he was in his 70s, because he was doing, he was a TV producer, he was a theater producer, he wrote historic novels, and he was never really successful until he was in his 70s, when he started to write police novels, thrillers,
crime
with an
novels,
Italian touch. And I found the story fascinating because by following this strategy of understanding that hoarding and really becoming sterile, becoming rigid, is not going to give you happiness. I mean, everybody needs a certain level of security, financial security. But I think the strategy that Camilleri followed in his career, with the ups and downs, because I mean, this is a person who actually was in the Second World War. You find these ups and downs in many careers, but eventually he followed the right strategy by taking reasonable risk, starting new projects, and eventually he became very successful.
Well, yeah, I have to read some of his books. I just saw that today in the Corriere della Sera. I was looking at it. John Vespasian, why are you so skeptical about going back to nature as a recipe for happiness? What does going back to nature mean for you?
Yes, apparently today is a big fashion. You have all these people who go on retreats, and they go to seminars and meditation, sometimes for a week, sometimes for several weeks. And I think it's nice to take a holiday, but one should not confuse holidays with reality. And to go back to nature and to say, okay, I'm fed up of this rat race. I'm going to go and live in a village, and I'm going to grow my vegetables. I'm going to produce my own clothes, whatever. I mean, this fantasy of total self-reliance, it is extremely unproductive. Because you are going to basically spend your whole time producing food and just surviving, because it's very inefficient to live. I mean, you can buy tomatoes for pennies, literally. Why should you want to spend, 2 months a year growing tomatoes? I mean, it's completely irrational. And people have an idea of nature that is totally romantic. If you go to live in a place which is not civilized, and you get mosquitoes and spiders and snakes, and this is nature. This is nature, and one should not believe all this nonsense that all you need to do is to go back to nature, to go to this retreat for a week, and everything will be fine. No, it's a nice holiday, but do not confuse the holiday. It's not going to solve your problems. People who do very well in the face of disruptions, these are people who have strategies in their daily lives to really reduce risk, to spread their investments, to spread their friendship, to have different types of friends, to have different types of skills. This is the perfect strategy to deal with disruptions. To go back to nature, for most people, is the equivalent of suicide.
Got it. That's very good. In your books, John Vespasian, you talk about the myth of the inception point. I'm not sure what that means, and what do you mean by that?
Inception point, I mean that when you read a story in the newspaper and you listen to your friends and say, oh, I was doing very well, and then I got this heart condition, and I became sick and I could not work anymore, or I was doing very well and then I went bankrupt, and I never really got back on my feet. I mean, you get these stories, and this inception point, this is when your life suddenly turns for the worse and you cannot recover. And I call this the myth of the inception point, because one of the stories I present in the book is the story of the demise of the Knights Templar. This was a military order in the 14th century, 13th, 14th century. And it happened almost overnight that this very powerful, very wealthy organization was completely destroyed because they arrested, the King of France arrested 6 of them. I mean, just the top of the organization. And it was 20,000 people. I mean, 20,000 people from the best families of Europe. They had castles, they had gold, They controlled basically the clearing of international payments. It was a very, very sophisticated organization. And it was destroyed within a few weeks just because the King of France made some false accusations against the leaders. And this is, when you look at history and say, oh, you know, the inception point was that this guy, his leader, the leader of the Templars, Jacques de Molay, he was arrested, and this was the inception point for the distraction of the Templars. It's nonsense.
It's like an excuse,
isn't
it, basically?
Yeah, this is like someone who has a heart attack and say, oh, you know, everything was fine until I got a heart attack. Yeah, but this guy has been smoking 10 cigarettes per day, drinking whiskey for breakfast for 20 years. And then he gets a heart attack and say, "Oh, just this is the inception point." It's not the inception point, and this is a fantasy. This is a fantasy, like the Templars. The Templars basically collapsed because they were super inefficient. They had a huge overhead from the 20,000 people. They barely had 2,000 able to fight. The other 18,000 was overhead. They were overextended financially. They didn't have a proper management structure, and they collapsed because they were already rotten, not because there was any kind of inception point. And for most people, it's very difficult, very hard to acknowledge that when you get this kind of adversity and your life is completely disrupted, it's not an inception point. It is a process. It is a situation of vulnerability that most of the time, for most people, is going to be traceable for years or for decades. And this is one of the main messages for the book. The best way to avoid becoming a victim of great disruptions is to have already a lifestyle that makes you very strong instead of making you very weak.
Got it, yeah. Well, in your books, you often advise readers to learn a second language, even move to a foreign country. For someone who has little time, what is the easiest way to learn a foreign language?
The easiest way to learn a foreign language is to use the method of Schliemann, who was an archaeologist, a businessman in the 19th century. And Schliemann, who was also a very successful archaeologist because he found traces of Troy. I mean, he was really a very entrepreneurial personality, but he learned, according to himself, he learned 18 languages. Possibly it was about 6. But he did it. Actually, he could speak, he was German in origin, but he could speak Dutch, he could speak Russian, he could speak French, he could speak Greek, and also read ancient Greek. So he learned the languages, and he learned on his own. And this is what I found fascinating, because now people complain, you know, I cannot learn Spanish, I cannot learn Italian because I have no time to go to the country. Yeah. I mean, what nonsense. I mean, this guy was learning Russian because he wanted to get a job. Basically, he made his fortune in Russia. And he was living in the Netherlands, and he was conscious that there were great business opportunities in Russia, but he could not afford to go to classes because he was just a clerk in a company. So what he did, and this is, I think, the best method to learn any language, and very, very fast, you just get some notions of grammar, which will take you about a week. You just need to understand how the sentences are constructed and to read the letters. This is very simple. Even if you take a language like Russian and they use the Cyrillic alphabet, it will take you a week to understand basically how the language works. And then the only thing you have to do is to get what the Schliemann did in the 19th century. He would get a book that he knew already. And in his case, he would take a book in German. So he would take a book in Russian, and little by little, with extreme patience, he would read a few sentences per day. Then he would read a page, and he would read the book 20 times, and he basically learned many sentences by heart. So by the time he went to Russia, his Russian was very artificial because he could only basically use the sentences from the book. He had read a very. There was a novel in the 19th century, was a bestseller. It was called Paul and Virginie, and he liked this romantic novel.
Yeah.
So he read it in German and Russian. And when he went to work in St. Petersburg as a trade agent, he could speak badly, but he could understand a lot, and he immediately picked it up because he had the basic ability. So you want to learn any language, use the same approach. It's very simple. Just get a simple book, even a children's book will do. Start reading every day a couple of pages, and within a couple of years, you can be speaking fluently, and then you go from there. But it's very low cost. It's very easy because it's very natural to do. And come on, if this guy could do it in the 19th century, what can you with YouTube, TV channels, and this kind of stuff? I mean, you can learn whatever you want.
That's right. Well, they try to make it easier. They talk about this Babel method, but we're getting near. Unfortunately, we only got about half a minute left. So I'm going to end this up very soon. I just wanted to say that next time, because you're going to be on next month as well, we can talk about language and start from there, and also about your other things. We have been speaking with writer John Vespasian about the state of being undisrupted, how highly effective people deal with disruptions, which is his latest book in 2019. John Vespasian has put out 10 very interesting books on rational living on Amazon. He is a guest today on Curmudgeonly Yours with host Richard Bont on societybitesradio.com. This broadcast is also available on other internet platforms such as Sound Echo, Spotify, AHA Radio, iHeartRadio, and iTunes, as well as on richardbont.com. Click on podcasts. Thank you very much, John Vespasian. So I'd like to thank our guests for being on Curmudgeonly Yours today. And please, if you like what you heard, send me an email to richard@richardbont.com. And if you didn't, please keep your comments to yourself. Remember, this is Richard Bont and Curmudgeonly Yours on Society Bites Radio, where everything is what it seems, nothing is what it seems, and what is not said is often of most interest.